Before we jump into today's episode, quick disclaimer that this podcast isn't therapy. It's educational, not individualized advice. Everyone's brain and story are different, so if you're struggling, reach out to a licensed pro who can support you.
We talk about the stuff no one dares. ADHD, sex, and the science that cares. Real talk, raw truth, and the stories that heal. Welcome to ADHD Reality with Dr. B.
Welcome back to ADHD Realities, the podcast where we talk about what's really going on inside our restless, brilliant, overstimulated, under-rewarded brains. I'm Dr. Leann Borneman, clinical sexologist, ADHD relationship and sex researcher, and fellow ADHDer and mom/wife. And today we are going to go straight for the jugular of this modern moral panic, rot culture, and doom scrolling. You know, those viral posts screaming that our brains are melting because we look at screens and that the only way to heal is to move to a cabin, churn the fucking butter, and journal about gratitude. Sure, Susan. Let me just throw away my iPhone and meditate my dopamine back into alignment. All right, all jokes aside, the problem is almost everything being said about overstimulation right now is based on research that doesn't even include the kind of brains we have. So today we're going to separate science from shame, and I'm going to be asking the real question here. Are screens actually wrecking us? Or are we misdiagnosing how regulation works in ADHD? I don't know. Let's find out. So let's start with the current myth that we're all drowning in, right? The internet loves to say your brain is rotting. You scroll too much, you multitask, you're overstimulated, you're addicted, you're fried. There's even fucking merch now for this. Like, I've seen the brain rot hoodies, like, no joke. Irony, check, it's achieved. And what's interesting is I've noticed over the last year or so as I've been observing this is that the studies that are getting tossed around, most of them is the correlation stuff, right? They're also short term. They're done on neurotypical college kids in controlled labs. And so that means they tell us absolutely nothing about how a chronically understimulated ADHD brain actually uses screens to function, regulate, or even survive. And the average adult spending 7 hours a day on screens, spiel that we get. Okay, but what are they doing? Are they coding? Are they parenting? Are they watching raccoons eat pizza on TikTok? Contact matters, Karen. Contact matters. And you know, the kicker here that I find amusing is that half the people screaming doom scrolling don't even know what the fuck the word means. Yeah. Because guess what? Scrolling funny shit like dog videos, the ADHD memes, your favorite comfort creator, that's not doom scrolling. That's your nervous system self-regulating. Doom scrolling means consuming distressing, fear-based content that's spiking your freaking anxiety. The doom part in doom scrolling actually matters. But the internet, it loves a dramatic label. So now, doom scrolling just means using your freaking phone more than 15 minutes. And that right there, that pathologizes joy. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you're not spiraling, you're freaking decompressing. Sometimes your brain is saying, I've been masking and focusing for 8 hours straight. I need a hit of something funny before I implode. God forbid, right? And you know what? That's not rot. That's regulation. So when I hear wellness influencers or people in my freaking field say things like, put the phone down, it's killing you, I'm like, cool. Are you going to pay my dopamine bill while you're at it? Probably not, so kindly shut the fuck up. Okay, rant over. I want to talk science. We need to talk science because I'm the science queen. I'm the nuance queen. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to talk about the so-called science, okay? And I say that because while I respect and love science and objectivity, there are still significant gaps in the literature and the research designs that are made, I could say, by monkeys instead of actual experts in these areas, right? It's researchers that find an interest and it's like, ooh, but you're really not holding that level of expertise to really go into it correctly, ethically, hold the nuance that's needed for it. We see it like when I look at some of the assessment tools being used by researchers, they clearly have no mental health license. And then that is what's leaving the gaps in the literature. So that's why I'm all like so-called science right now. We need to do better. And that is a completely separate rant. Maybe I'll do an episode on that. But anywho's, going back to why we're all here, I think of like headlines, and you've probably seen headlines like, study after study that social media use is predicting worse mood and less focus. But when you dig into the methods in some of these research findings, almost all of them are relying on the small self-reported samples of mostly neurotypical college students. And many are collected during or right after pandemic isolation, or right after the pandemic isolation. So, of course, they were depressed. They were living in a sociocultural dumpster fire. And then you have like headlines where it's also talking about the screen time being linked to the ADHD symptoms. That one floats around constantly. And it sounds ominous, right? But every one of those studies, again, correlation, relationships. What they're actually showing is that people with ADHD tendencies are using screens differently because dopamine is dopamine. It's a feedback loop. It's not a moral failure. And I think one of the biggest limitations that we really need to outline here is that these studies treat all screen time most of the time as like the same. So for instance, like watching a 2-hour political rage video binge is being similarly coded as the same as texting your best friend or hyper-focusing on crafting tutorials that calms you. And not for nothing, but that's like kind of saying all foods lead to obesity because you didn't differentiate between broccoli and cheesecake. Like, come on. But sure, let's keep writing op-eds about brain rot because it's catchy and it's getting you likes. So why not? Who cares, right? Who cares about nuance and objectivity? But when we do look at the data, when we truly unpack it, it's suggesting things like for neurotypical adults that yes, endless exposure to negative content is relating with anxiety. But it's also relating with poor sleep, lower life satisfaction. And then we also see for ADHD adults, for the research that is and has been looking into these things, that the picture becomes a little bit more complicated, layered, nuanced. Because stimulation itself isn't the problem. Regulation is. And the dopamine system in ADHD operates generally on interest-based activation. So a phone providing novelty and instant feedback can be both a lifeline and a landmine, depending on the individual. And that means when we use screens to manage understimulation, it works. Until it doesn't. When it tips into avoidance, or let's say shutdown, and then it shuts down the functioning altogether for you, we call that then dysregulation. But blanket bans like just unplug, that's ignoring the entire neurobiology of ADHD in my professional opinion. And I love hearing when people say things like, when I say people in my field, the patient or the client presents with excessive screen use. No. The client presents with a brain trying to meet its dopamine quota using the only consistent reinforcement system it has to access to it. You see the difference there? That's nuance. Now, that's not me denying that maybe somebody has excessive screen use. But just because you see somebody looking at their fucking phone and scrolling for an hour doesn't mean it's excessive. How is it affecting them? Negatively? Positively? What are we doing here? Okay, so I'm going to, again, see the difference? Okay, see the difference. And so then this is where we have to lean in and zoom in on the ADHD paradox here. Because ADHD brains, we're just built for freaking contradictions. We can be overstimulated and bored at the same damn time. And I'm sure you felt that one. We've all been there. And here's what's happening, though, under the hood, right? Because when we look at ADHD brains and our experiences, many of us and our brains, we're going to have lower baseline dopamine and then the neuropernephrine as well. And so what that means is that we feel flat more easily. So then we crave stimulation to feel engaged. But then we flood ourselves with high intensity input, like, let's say, scrolling 20, 30 tabs, texting, watching a show simultaneously, right? And then we overshoot the curve. And then that's when the system fries. And you know that crash. It's the, I was just vibing until I wasn't, and now I hate everything crash. And I gotta be honest, that's not a weakness. It's physics. And I'm gonna make this personal. So let's get a little personal, right? Because again, your girl over here, I'm an ADHDer. So last Tuesday, I doom scrolled an entire algorithm of ADHD coaches claiming that they could fix your executive dysfunction with morning affirmations on a color-coded Notion template. You know those, right? Anyway, 45 minutes later, I was more unregulated than when I started. Why? Because I wasn't seeking information. I was seeking soothing. And the feed gave me stimulation without resolution. And that right there is the ADHD paradox. We seek the intensity to self-regulate, but intensity doesn't always equal satisfaction. So the question becomes, how do we use stimulation strategically instead of chaotically? Now, first step number 1, drop the shame. And then if you're done doing that, step 2, identify what kind of input your nervous system actually needs. So think, is it novelty? Is it connection? Are you looking for sensory grounding? Laughter, maybe? Pick your medicine, not your poison. When I watch a 20-minute stand-up reel and I laugh out loud, my body literally unclenches. When I scroll an endless comment war on Reddit, or I see a ADHD coach speaking out of their ass, I end up dissociated and dysregulated. Same screen, different outcome. So the conversation shouldn't be directly just going to screens equal bad. It should be, does this input regulate or dysregulate me? And I want to come back and talk more about that shame piece, because I argue that this right here, the shame, is the real rot that not enough people are mentioning. Because the truth is that half of the distress people feel about their screen time isn't from the actual behavior itself. It's from the judgment of the behavior, right? We've all been there. You scroll after work and suddenly you're a failure of modern civilization. People say things like, you're wasting your potential. No, Brenda, I'm recovering from the mental load of surviving another day in a world that punishes distractions but rewards overwork. That right there, my friends, is guilt spiral. That's what's frying us. And when you internalize this belief that every dopamine hit is a self-harm, you disconnect from your own body's feedback system. You hijack it. And when we look at the science, when we experience shame, it's activating the very same neural pathways as physical pain. So if every time you pick up your phone, you're also punching yourself in the ego, your body is learning that regulation equals guilt. Now you got 2 problems: dysregulation and shame about dysregulation. It's a clusterfuck. And I see this clinically all the time. ADHD clients, my clients, who say things like, I don't know why I can't just stop scrolling. It's like I'm watching myself do this, Leann. And you know, that, again, not weakness. That's executive lag. The part of the brain that's actually noticing the problem is faster than the part that can shift the behavior itself. So while the world is screaming, just stop, I'm over here freaking screaming from the hilltop, just understand your fucking brain first. Because you can't shame your way into self-regulation. You can only understand your way there. And this is where I get a little fired up, if you couldn't tell. Because we've built this culture that's equating the stillness with moral superiority. If you're resting, you're lazy. If you're scrolling, you're weak. If you're overstimulated, you're broken. Meanwhile, neurotypical research sets the standard for healthy regulation, right? Studies full of brains that don't have to fight for focus every damn day. So when you, the ADHDer, feel like you're failing at balance, it's because you're being measured against the wrong fucking blueprint. You're not doing life wrong. You're doing life with a nervous system that wasn't included in the freaking data set. So let's rewrite the damn story. Screens aren't the villain. They're a mirror. They show you what you crave and what you avoid. And so when you catch yourself scrolling, I want you to ask, what am I actually needing right now? If the answer is stimulation, cool. Find the flavor that fills you up, not burns you out. If the answer is connection, text the friend, not the algorithm. If it's avoidance, give yourself permission to pause before judging it. Because I gotta tell you something, avoidance is also information. It's your brain's way of saying, like, something feels too big right now. Something's off. That's, again, not moral failure. That's a cue for us to lean into curiosity, right? And I tell my clients this all the time. The goal isn't to eliminate your coping tools. It's to refine them. To build environments that are working with your brain and not against it. And that includes your digital environment. So instead of counting screen hours, track your post-scroll moods. I know, wild thought, right? Did you feel better, calmer, more creative? Or did you feel empty, foggy, disconnected? That's the metric. That's the self-science of ADHD. We need to stop treating stimulation like it's the enemy. Because for a lot of ADHD brains, the stimulation is the language we speak, peeps. The work is learning how to translate it, not mute it. And I'll say it again for the people in the back. If you are functioning, connecting, laughing, creating, and yes, occasionally scrolling raccoon videos at 1 a.m. because it helps you come down from the fucking chaos of life, that's not rot. That's a nervous system doing what it can with what it has. Now, if you're stuck in a cycle, though, where your phone is running you instead of the other way around, that's when the pause needs to happen, but not to punish, to recalibrate. And ask yourself, what does regulation look like for me? What does overstimulation feel like in my body? That right there, that's the real data that matters. So the next time someone is lecturing you about this digital detox, you can just say, I'm not detoxing, I'm decoding. Because maybe the problem isn't screens. Maybe it's our refusal to see the fucking nuance. And nuance is where liberation lives. All right, my ADHD fam, that's all for today's episode of ADHD Realities. If this resonated, I want you to share it with someone who's been told their phone is rotting their brain because, again, probably not. But shame sure as hell is. And you can find all the research articles I mentioned in the show notes below. And if you want to go deeper into how executive functioning and stimulation actually works in relationships and intimacy, I want you to check out my Executive Functioning 101 ebook. Links also in the description below. As always, follow, rate, and subscribe so we can keep dismantling this neurotypical bullshit together. And until next time, I want you to stay curious, stay fierce, stay regulated, my peeps.